Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome to this second webinar of the series of Edu4Europe. Today, we have the pleasure to have with us the Professor Rosi Braidotti that will thicken that the topic of this intervention will be flexible European citizenship and the crucial role of education in Europe today. Before starting to work together about the topic and introduce the professor, I will pass the floor to Lana Pasic that will remind us a little bit about the project and also about the scope of Edu4Europe series of webinar and also the forum concept. Thank you, Lana.
Thank you, Fede, for the introduction, and I will be sharing my screen briefly just so to bring in a bit of a background on Edu4Europe project. So Forum on European Education for Democratic Citizenship was a project that started, firstly in 2017 when we had first seminar in Strasbourg on youth work and democratic citizenship education. And this was driven by us at the Youth Partnership, the seminar then, and it was also in cooperation with several national agencies. After that, we basically focused on organizing the forums, which was led in 2019 by the French National Agency, and the forum was organized in Strasbourg in November 2019. And the concept of the forum is to have an event once a year where we bring around 100 to 120 participants who speak about the citizenship education in their countries, how this happens, and also what are some of the key concepts and the need for citizenship education in Europe today. So the first forum focused on the concepts and on our understanding of European education for democratic citizenship, but also on the future of Europe. So we looked at where we will be maybe 50 years from now. So the second forum, which was supposed to take place in Italy last year, was for obvious reasons of the pandemic, then postponed to 2021. And we are going to see also what are the possibilities of holding face-to-face events till this year or potentially next year. But in the meantime, our work does not stop. Just because we cannot meet in person does not mean that we will not be working on this. As we are seeing now, especially with the pandemic, the need for participation and citizenship education is growing. So therefore, we started a series of webinars within the Edu4Europe that will be run until the forum is held. So last November, we had our first webinar to mark 1 year since the forum. And that was with Bryony Hoskins, who spoke about the concepts and how citizenship education is differently understood in different countries, in different contexts, and also reflecting on different understandings such as human rights education, for example, global citizenship education, etc. And we are continuing this series now with Professor Rosi Braidotti, and we will also be having further webinars then in the future. But I also invite you to have a look at our page as well as our YouTube channel, where you can find all the recordings from previous webinars and also some videos from the first forum. So I stop sharing now and I pass the floor back to Fede for the continuation.
Thank you very much, Lana. I think it's very important to see where these webinars are part of a long strategy. And also why for us is important because as the previous webinar will be also part of the milestones for the forum. And also will be part of also the preparation that we are doing for us in terms of creating and assessing and consolidate the concept. That is important concept that need to be understood and to be analyzed from different point of view. I would pass the floor to the other person that with me is facilitating this session together, Bruno, that is dealing a little bit the session with me, just to introduce briefly who also him, and then we'll pass to the floor to the Professor Rosi immediately after.
Thank you, Federica, and hi everyone. Hope that you're enjoying this start of this afternoon with this interesting thematic that we'll be exploring. I'm just going to share with you 2 slides of the Menti. I imagine that is a tool that you are already acquainted with. And a couple, 2 questions now. I'll just put also sharing on my screen that you can already see it. So the first question, to start here, some reflection on the topic is can European citizenship education be taught? This is the first question. So you can use the code, so you can just Google and you can put menti.com and you have the code 55353401. Okay, just to see if there is some reaction from the audience regarding our first question. And we'll wait here. So we have 3 already people saying that yes. And the second question here is going to be and the Menti have finished. Okay, so I was thinking that was another one, but was this first question. Thank you. And now,
thank you very much. I think this was a little bit of what we want to go and to discuss through, no? And this is where we pass the floor to the Professor Rosi Braidotti, that is a contemporary philosopher and a feminist theorist. She is a distinguished university professor at the Utrecht University, and we ask her to help us to a little bit investigate more this topic with us. I'm passing the floor to the professor for her presentation, and I would also remind the people that are following us on Facebook or through the link that it's possible to raise a question at the end of the presentation or during the presentation. Just would be enough to comment on Facebook, and we will go to collect the question and ask it then. Thank you very much, and I'm passing the floor to you, Rosi.
Thank you to the whole team of Edu4Europe forum. It would have been so much nicer to all be together and looking into the eyes in an unmediated manner. But let's take this as an emblem, a symbol of our very advanced technological position, that we are actually happy to do this, to be capable of doing this. 20 minutes to try to make a case that is very, very dear to my heart about Europe, about citizenship, about democracy, about what do you do when you try to think in a European context. And this is for me an ongoing struggle, because I became a European federalist at the age of 13 in Italy, in my northeast part of Italy, very close to Yugoslavia, what was then Yugoslavia. And my grandfather, who was a partisan, an anti-fascist partisan, instilled upon us the necessity of building a Europe that would learn from the mistakes, not only of one, but of 2 world wars. So the idea of a European space as the space where Europe thinks about itself in critical and constructive ways. That is, for me, my birth certificate. That's where everything starts for me. And I do think people of my generation, the so-called post-war kids or baby boomers, have this type of relationship to the European Union as both the punishment for what we did in the Second World War and a chance of revival, a chance of actually constructing something new. I believe that this is quite different from generation to generation. So I want to put this in the middle from the start, because I think it's a way of facilitating the conversation. You will not be surprised to know that today I am a full paying member of the political party called Volt. And I think Volt is a phenomenal exercise in the construction of European democratic spaces. And I see the European project as not incomplete or unfinished, but as very solid work in progress, as something that we can only construct if we get truly involved. It is a continuous call for becoming involved in the process of constructing this thing. Passionate, critical, fully involved, seeing it as a great chance. And I want this to be perfectly clear because I know how widespread Euroscepticism is. And I would like to do a small quick cartography of Euroscepticism if the time allows it, to try to open it up and discuss it seriously, beyond the ideologies, beyond the rhetoric of the lament, beyond the xenophobia and the racism, looking at what the issues really are. So the question is, what kind of a teaching kit is the project of the European Union? What kind of a thinking aid is it? I am a philosopher by training, a PhD from the Sorbonne, so very much a European continental philosopher. Thinking for me is the equivalent of breathing. I don't see any difference. Oxygen, ideas, same thing. What kind of a thinking aid is the project of the European Union for democratic criticism and European citizenship? And I think depending on a little bit your political affiliations and your sense of values, a lot of my students fall into mild groups of Eurosceptics. The ones who say, oh, the European Union, they say that they are democratic, but we are really not. It's all the elites, the blah, 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 that I should call a sort of a center-right objection to the project. And then the other ones are the real left-wingers who say this is capitalism at work, God forbid, we can't let this happen. Both of them completely misplaced, but both of them very widespread and at the same time worthy of engagement for. So how about we agree that as work in progress, the European Union stands for many multiple internally contradictory things. Big player on the global arena, of course embracing some sort of neoliberal economics. Politics is the art of the possible. It is not science fiction. You have to work with what you have. So it is that at the same time, it is a transformative space. And what it transforms is some ideas about the old Europe, the Europe of nationalism, the Europe of greed, the Europe of fascism, the Europe of colonial expansion, the Europe that thinks of itself as the center of the world. The European Union is a reworking, a critical revisitation of those ideas. As Etienne Balibar, a left-wing supporter of the European Union, put it, Europe is the place that is historically condemned to think about its history. A glorious history, a tragic history, a history of successes, a history of dismal failures. It is a matter of and not of either or. If you think about the project of the European Union, you have to make do with complexity and you have to make do with subtlety, avoiding the polarizations that unfortunately are a trademark of our era, where the public sphere is poisoned by simplification and weaponized differences. To deal with the democratic potential of the European Union as an ongoing transformative project, we need complexity, subtlety, patience, and a minimum of commitment. So if you look at the projects of transformation that the European Union is attempting, Habermas put it for all of us over 15 years ago, it's a post-nationalist project. It's the project that was born out of the ruins of the Second World War. Don't forget that. It was not born out of neoliberal, grandiose capitalism. It was the punishment that the Allied imposed on Europe for what we did in the Second World War. Never forget that history. Never forget that history. We are historically responsible for that, as we are historically responsible for colonialism and the subjugation of most of this planet. These are historical responsibilities which you must not translate into guilt. Guilt is a luxury that we cannot afford. That will be transformed into consciousness raising, understanding that we get a chance here to do things better, to learn from our mistake and construct different places. Post-nationalism in Europe sounds like a joke today, when you know that the opposition to the European Union, particularly on the right of the political spectrum, is all hyper-nationalistic. Whether you're looking at Hungary, whether you're looking at the populists in Italy, people are coming up with the most bizarre redefinition of nationalism, not only at the national level, at the regional, provincial, city, municipal, neighborhood level. We have micro-nationalisms coming up like mushrooms. And all of those nationalisms embrace degrees of Italianness, degrees of Hungarianness, degrees of Frenchness against the notion, God forbid, of a post-nationalist European space. The virus of nationalism, the sickness of the old Europe still with us. I am sure that there can be a healthy form of nationalism. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm sure that we can get to it. For the moment, it's a sickness that poisons the public sphere and prevents the discussion from taking place. The European Union is a chance to rework that nationalism into a broader, open understanding that we are cosmopolitan, grounded in our history, tragic and glorious, that we can only swim or sink together, and that we have responsibility, shared responsibility, that we can now rework by creating a more fair, a more open space in Europe and outside. So a progressive, transformative place that leaves behind the old imperial Europe, that forces people to think again about what we are. I studied philosophy, and I can tell you that there is a close connection between philosophy and a certain idea of Europe, the civilizational role of Europe. And that comes from very much from the 18th century and the notion that white man has a civilizing mission to play out into the world. It's at the core of colonialism. It is at the core of some of the great atrocities and some of the great triumphs of our culture. Europe as a state of mind, Europe as a degree of consciousness, the absolute presumptions of that, the arrogance of imagining that what is Europe stands for, the cradle of civilization. We need to leave that behind. The European Union is a more humble, collaborative way of re-elaborating together our interdependence. We depend on each other for knowledge, for strength, for wisdom, for the economics, for everything. Replacing the grandiose megalomania and the violence of Eurocentrism with a more open space. In what was Western Europe during the Cold War, we were raised in these values. The denazification and the post-fascist education in Europe through the 60s and 70s that my generation underwent taught us this. We were brought up to understand that we had a responsibility. This denazification of post-fascist education did not happen in Eastern Europe for obvious reasons. They were occupied by the Soviet Union. They went from one dictatorship to another. And so that the process of thinking what it means not to have democracy is unfinished. More advanced on the West because the Allied forces put us through that. They changed every educational curriculum in the university, post-45, total redefinition of curriculum. Nietzsche disappears, a lot of philosophy disappears, American social theory comes in. After 1989, when the unification of Germany, something analogous happens. There is a change of curriculum, new ideas of democracy comes in. But these processes are ongoing. They are not, they need to keep on going. And there is a difference between revisiting our past and feeling guilty. Do not waste time feeling guilty. Extract knowledge from the experiences of the past to make affirmative propositional contribution for the present. You can see the methodology here. Ground ourselves in the European Union space as a transformative space, a place where we can revisit and reassess our history. Read Altiero Spinelli, the first European Commissioner. Read Ursula Hirschman, Women of Europe, extraordinary texts that actually force the European to reflect about what our culture has done to ourselves, to the world, to our built environment, to nature. Think Europe as a thinking aid, Europe as a teaching kit. Revisit, re-inhabit, transform, and ground yourself in a history, not in order to claim it in a narrow nationalistic manner. Embrace that history to learn from it and to transform it. not to repeat the mistakes of hegemonic Eurocentrism, of imperial sense of superiority over every other culture, equating Europe with Christianity, Christianity with science, science with human progress with European law, as we have done so often in our history, learning to be an active periphery in a world where we actually can play still a role. The transformation from Eurocentrism to what I call the becoming minor, the becoming flexible, the becoming nomadic of European space. Nomadic comes from my philosophy learned with Gilles Deleuze and other philosophers, where nomadic means in movement, quite simply. Process ontologies. We are going places, we're going towards a democratic space, a space of sharing, re-elaborating a history that is glorious and tragic at the same time. Dear chairs, how many minutes have I got left?
You have more 10 minutes.
I have 10 minutes? Oh my God, I spoke faster than I thought. Thank you, Bruno, you're my best friend.
But we have a couple of questions then. If you...
No, I will keep it short because it's very problematic, I want to be a little bit controversial. The example that I wanted to give this is the example of European citizenship as a legal structure, the flexible citizenship model that the European Union has pioneered, and which a great deal of member states are not applying at all. If you're looking at the legal thinking of the structure of European citizenship, it is a masterpiece. It is a masterpiece of legal thinking because it accomplishes an operation that had been done before in law in the North Ireland Peace Treaty. That is to say, it delinks the three basic units that compose citizenship: the place that you were born in, the nationality of the community that you were born in, and the actual citizenship, the state structure that you were born in. The three elements are delinked. So you can be a Portuguese kid from Portuguese people born in Portugal, straightforward. And you have automatically a cultural identity as Portuguese, as Italian. You have a nationality of that place. The citizenship is brought one level up at European level. So born Italian or Portuguese, you become European. In our case, automatically. Now, you are the child of an immigrant working in Italy, Senegalese, I don't know, Nigerian, parents back home, stateless if you're a refugee, no nationality. Theoretically, according to legal theory, there is nothing preventing a person like this from having European citizenship because the three levels are actually delinked. It could easily be done. We could easily confer European citizenship to anybody living and working on our territory for even flexible temporary times, making them legal, functional Europeans, because there is no connection, there's no necessary logical legal connection between ethnicity, identity, and citizenship. They are delinked, disaggregated, reassembled. People who live in Northern Ireland are British, no connection to the territory, no connection to these are the deterritorialized, extremely clever, extremely progressive tools that the European Union as a thinking aid is giving us. Put in the hands of the member states, we know what happens. Okay? We clack, everything closed and shut. Salvini goes to the boat, sinks the immigrant. If he had a machine gun, he would shoot them. We know what they're doing. Orban, Fortress Europe. But that is the problem of the member states' application of a set of rules and regulations that the European Union has put in place that are immensely progressive, immensely transformative, if the political will was there. And I think for me, a flexible European citizenship would be anybody who's in our territory, working in any capacity, becomes European, regardless of where they were born, what their nationality, let alone religion, sexuality, gender is. In a process of flexible citizenship, I'm quoting Ulrich Preuss and other serious legal thinker who are talking about alienage, that is, a disaggregation of citizenship from nationality and ethnicity. Incredibly important move. You can see what the potential of this is to defeat racism and xenophobia, and from opening up the horizon to a Europe that would be truly a space of mobility, a space of mixity, a space of living together with heterogeneous differences. Why does this not make us dream? Why does Europe not make us dream? Why is there a deficit of the social imaginary when it comes to the European Union as a democratic space? The example that I always give, being Italian, I love football. When the Italian national team plays, I don't care where I am, what I do, I'm out there singing, crying, and with every goal, I pick up the phone and I call up my brother in Melbourne, Australia, just to say, goal, okay? Nationality, soccer, sport. Unimaginable that we would do that with the European football team. We don't even have one. Unimaginable. Deficit in the social imaginary of a European level. It is the other side of what I just told you in terms of the different levels: ethnicity, identity, citizenship. Our social imaginary is grounded in cultural identity, in the rituals of everyday life. That's what constructs the imaginary. I think what we need to do now is work together to create a European imaginary, a level up. And I think a lot of Erasmus projects, political parties like Volts, any types of hybrid mixed social imaginary, so that the European space as the specific slice of territory that we occupy becomes something that we take care of, that we are in love with, and that we project the future for. I am with Friedrich Nietzsche on this. The good Europeans are the Europeans that are critical, and the best way to honor our culture is to be positively and practically critical of it. Yes, a European social imaginary to dream again of a democracy to come.
Thank you, Rosi, and just on time to open here some questions.
You really sat on me there. I was accelerated to stay within the times.
Thank you, thank you. We have Lana also that had some question, and then we go here for a question also from the audience, from Gilles. But maybe first we pass the floor to Lana.
Thank you, Bruna. It was really interesting and inspiring to listen to this, and I wanted to link a bit more from the kind of the legal definition of citizenship and understanding. Okay, this is how we are given certain citizenship characteristics or certain rights to the practice of citizenship. So once we do have these legal rights or labels, let's call them like that, through this nationality, culture, and identity, then we still have to, as citizens, practice that. So we do have these rights, but we also have the obligations to make sure that our citizenship actually can be used towards influencing the society and communities that we live in. So maybe to reflect a little bit more on this practice of citizenship, and also the role of education in forming or let's say, influencing young people as young citizens towards becoming active citizens and practicing their citizenship. So I would go with that for now. I have a couple more questions for later on, but maybe after the questions from the viewers. Thank you, Bruno, and thank you, Rosi.
Rosi, I'll also put another question. You have these two. The question is from Gilles Nunes. Do you agree? So the question is, do you agree that even in between brackets, good colonialism can be a good weapon to fight nationalisms that is damaging Europe? Question mark. Because I think cosmopolitan Europe is a product of before European times.
Not sure that I understand. Can good colonialism be a weapon to?
A good weapon to fight nationalisms that are damaging Europe. With a question mark. And then there is a short comment from his part, because I think cosmopolitan Europe is a product of before European times, of even before European times.
So now I'm supposed to answer all these questions. I have 3 minutes, right?
More than this. And then we could have still a round for a couple of more questions, of course.
Lana, I took your point as a point of order, a clarification. I completely agree. Praxis I'm thinking of the work of Elgin Isin on citizenship as performance. My concern is that we have too many of people that are working, so-called working on our territory in very exploitative conditions, whether they are itinerant migrants, whether they are Eastern European transferring to the West, to former West, whether they are refugees, that are they're falling out of any legal protection, exposed to unimaginable forms of exploitation and everyday racism, because they have not the right to have rights, to quote Hannah Arendt. I think any model of flexible citizenship that would make them be part of the system would be a step forward, crucial during a pandemic. Because with this invisible labor force, we don't even know where they are, let alone be able to vaccinate them. We cannot have a situation of such disparities on our territory. And we need to keep this into some sort of order. So that would be the advantage of a system. Then, of course, rights and obligations and playing by the rules. But every refugees I've ever worked with did ask for nothing more than to fall within the rules and to be able to be entitled to function. The fact that we park people away for 7, 8 years, unable to study, unable to work, unable to do anything, is not a guarantee of any democratic citizenship. These people have to become part of the citizenry, temporary, flexible, but part of it. I think that that's the sense of that. Education, it couldn't be more crucial, but have we really got a common policy, even when it comes to teaching the history, say, of the 2 world wars? And I think this is the whole crucial question of how great big geopolitical changes, and of the Second World War, fall of fascism, fall of the Berlin Wall, and of communism, how those massive events are translated into educational packages. It seems to me that the translation has not taken place. Italy still teaches Italy as the head of the Renaissance the world over, and it came singularly out of the heads of the Medici family in common brilliance, nothing to do with the fall of Constantinople and the refugees from Constantinople come to Italy, bringing over the classical text of Greece, and consequently bringing the Renaissance to the so-called Western world. No, and a parthenogenesis of white genius. Greece is still teaching. We've done this work in my work as gender professor. We looked at how the history was being taught, all completely self-aggrandizing Eurocentrism. The only country that has been seriously reformed on this is Germany, because it was thoroughly reorganized after the Second World War, by far the most democratic country in the EU. We should all have undergone that process, the process of revisiting how nationalism constructs the curriculum. So many European countries still believe that colonialism was a good thing. Have you talked to any of the colonized people? I don't mean the elites that were our allies in the business, to the people on the ground. Have you talked to them about the effects of this? Have you been to Ethiopia and Eritrea, where the civil war is still going on? It's been going on for 60 years. Thank you, Mussolini. Have we really confronted this? I think educational reform is dynamite, because you're touching the nerve of national identity. And I think nationalism is tucked away in the curriculum. And Eastern Europe, let's not even get started using the lament. We were so oppressed by the Soviet Union, and you certainly were. And it's also time is passing. It's time to review all of this. So I think here democratic criticism, critical curriculum, absolutely crucial and important. Bruno, I do not know what good colonialism is. I don't know who would define it as. It all depends who you talk to. Colonialism is an act of invasion and looting of other people's property, devastation of the environment, devastation of the culture. I grew up as an Italian migrant in Australia. How long have you got about the Australian Aborigine and what happened there? There is no such a thing. I think we need to recognize that every European country, from Denmark, who was the 7th slave trading country in the world, to Serbia, a massive empire, each country had its own empire. Portugal, what an empire. But if you go to the curriculum of a university, of a high school, and you look for where is this history being taught, oops, oh, me, Brazil? Oh yeah, I heard of Brazil, they're good at football. That's the extent of it. Spain and South America, 2 completely different planets. Italy and Libya, Ethiopia, nothing to do with them. Germany and Namibia, you really have to go looking for it. Denmark acknowledges that now they still have Greenland. Greenland is still their colony because now it is very hot geopolitically because of the mining issues on the Barents Sea. So if you're looking at where in the educational program this awareness would show, it simply doesn't. And to get there, the European Union has no tools, because education is member states' responsibility. Status of women, shall we start on that one? No, let's not. If you take the critical axes and you look back at them in the curriculum, you will not find them. A lot of work to be done, a lot of goodwill, and a lot of demands from the young people. I think you need to demand some sort of truth. What really happened? How come they speak Portuguese in Brazil? Can somebody tell me that? How come they speak Spanish in Costa Rica? How come? That stupid question for which we're not providing answers. Yeah, well, it's a world language. What does it even mean to be a world language? I think a lot of work to be done here as the hegemony of Europe and America declines and the south of the world becomes a new mega power. Here is a chance for us to become intelligent, critical, compassionate, being proud of our culture critically, because that's what a good European is, as Nietzsche famously said.
Thank you, Rosi. I think in history in Portugal still, all colonialism is bad, except ours. We were the good colony.
Italiani brava gente, we're the best. The Africans threw flowers at us. They loved us. Don't get me started. You see the narrative.
No, I'm not.
But this is where we need to do serious curriculum work, gently, without offending anybody. We need to bring ourselves up to date with the complexities of our history.
Definitely. There's here one more question also from the audience for Malte that is connecting with this definition. And the question that is, it's a general definition of European citizenship and citizenship education useful or necessary in terms of the diversity of concepts, more useful for the discussion. So I'll read all the questions to see if it gets clear. So is a general definition of European citizenship and citizenship education useful, necessary, or is the diversity of concepts more fruitful for the discussion and the European discourse?
Thank you. And the answer is absolutely both. The advantage of having this disaggregation between your own personal ethnic grouping, the identity of the nation, the culture that you were born into, and legal citizenship, this analytic distinction, which is analytic because in everyday life we mix them all up. The lucky ones, the European citizens, can do that. Migrants encounter the difficulties, but most people go through them. The advantage of these analytic distinctions is that you can have a common legal structure at the level of the citizenship. Everybody born in a member state of the European Union has the nationality of that member state and the citizenship of Europe, but they're two different things. So you can have another nationality and still be a citizen of Europe. What is the advantage of that level? That it allows for a diversity of cultural identities. Don't even attempt to harmonize the cultural identities of Europe. Why would we? With all our languages, our traditions, our cooking tradition. I'm Italian. Am I going to eat Swedish food? No way. Lovely. Once a year. The rest of the time I cook. Thank you. I mean, I'm just mocking myself here. Cultural diversity is Europe. Polylingualism. Nobody's going to touch our languages. Even if only 5 million people speak Norwegian, it's a hell of a language, a literature, a culture, a tradition. It's not about that. The level of engagement in the European Union is the legal structures. There is a level at which those differences actually engender a common infrastructure, the European Union, the transformative tool, you see, the teaching aid. So diversity of a language tradition, the more the better. We should all speak 4 or 5 languages, but at the level of our citizenship, one common fluid space where we share values, pride in critical sense, being happy to be European, knowing the atrocities and the triumphs of our cultures. And it's not either all. I think that that's where we come in, enormous opportunity. But for the rest, hey, diversity stays diverse in our languages. Don't you touch my Italian or my French or my Dutch, which all are languages that I love, although I grew up in English, guess what? And I think this is a typical European of today. You're all like this. You people of Edu4, my Erasmus students, this diversity within a structure that allows analytic distinctions that can make us generate different social interaction, different social spaces.
Thank you, Rosi. We collect two more questions. So one from Federica and another one from Lana before starting to
yeah, many things and many reflections. I was taking quite a lot of notes and there are a couple of things in my mind, but I would just go back to one thing that you said at the beginning that to me ring my bell, because I was exactly thinking what you were saying about the construction of the European ideas, European Union between the two world wars, and also how much the impact has the two world wars in creating the identity of not only the identity of Europe, the identity of the idea of men and women that we had after the construction of the two world war, and it is a part of our history. When we come back to the curricula at the school that are completely, even not denied, but it's really tackled very superficial, no? If you look to the curricula at the school, the second two world war, the only implication in terms to be a global war, the first two wars that were also including civilians, so a completely new different way to have a look to the wars. But then one of the impact of this, or one of the development was creating nationalism. Now you were speaking about this developing a nationalism party. So, but you mentioned at a certain moment that at the moment there is a polarization. There is a high polarization in politics in Europe within the member states. You were doing also a concrete example, and then I was thinking that you said maybe there is a good way to have healthy form of nationalism. So I was curious about this provocation that you put on the table. What does it mean to have healthy form of nationalism? And I passed in the floor to
I never encountered it. I was wondering.
Exactly, but I was thinking it's an interesting thing, because nowadays we are going through coming back to the roots and to the regions and to the other side to keep open-minded to the European spirit. And I see there an inner polarization among citizens, not anymore about states. And I pass in the floor to Lana, because I think that Lana had another question just to...
I do. One of them was linked with polarization as well. So maybe Rosi can address that one first, and then I will go back to my other question.
That's the crucial one. That's a crucial one. The polarization and Euroscepticism coming from movements that we call populists because we don't know what else to call them. They really are nativists. They are regionalists, really. Salvini in Italy, the Le Pen dynasty in France are playing a different game right now. But also Eastern Europe, nativists, like our region, ourselves, me and my cousins, really, inbreds in some ways. Euroscepticism shares some characteristics in the populist movement, whether you're looking at the left or at the right. They're exactly the same when it comes to the European Union, against for totally absurd reasons. The left, because they see the European Union as the embodiment of the evil of capital, and the right, because they see the European Union as hating nationalism and national identities. Two lies for the price of one, but they join forces, creating a number of misconceptions about what the political targets are, as if the European Union were the one agent of capitalism in the world today. They haven't been looking at China, they haven't been looking at the States. I don't know what people are looking at. Look at our struggle to get the tech giants to be accountable for what they're doing. Just that, just what that commissioner is doing. Look at our legal provisions for privacy law, look at our green economy, and look at also at the many things that we don't do, but to see this as a capitalist state project when it is so social democratic that it drives the American nuts. Trump wanted this thing destroyed because it was against his perception of greedy capitalism. So misconception, lies, polarizing the discussion, bringing back a rough idiotic form of nationalism, because there are some intelligent forms of nationalism, and you saw them during the Second World War. I remember my anti-fascist grandfather, who, as you can see, is my hero, saying a fascist convinced of the superiority of Italian culture is somebody that you can talk to. A little conformist who goes along with whatever is in the wind just because that is the way to get by is not somebody that you can talk to. And I think what we're getting today is this kind of toxic atmosphere of nativist nationalism carried essentially by the internet, by the social platform, that are both public and private and completely unaccountable. I think that the damage that the digital highways have done to the project of democracy is unimaginable. I think we need a much more aggressive policy of responding to the lies that are circulating about the European Union being part of the global elite, being the cause of COVID, the lies. So polarization fed by lies, backed by technologies, and a totally regressive form of nativism that is absolutely without a program, that is a form of almost nihilistic opposition. It's saying no and no and no and no without having anything else to say. And that is so negative that it's very difficult to fight it. And sometimes I encounter it in my classroom as well. Nativism is alive in the big democracies of Northern Europe as well. Very difficult because on top of everything else, the Northern Europe, contrary to my country, Italy, did not have historical fascism. So the Dutch can say, my hands are clean. I don't have anything. Of course, yes, there was a little empire in Indonesia. Yeah, but we're not going to talk about that. Colonialism is not being taught very much in the Netherlands either. So denial of colonialism, but a sense of distance, of Euroscepticism. Education, education, and more education. There's no such a thing as one Northern Italian. I was born 300 kilometers from Federica on the other side. You speak French, we speak German, to cut a long story short. My grandmother, when she got Alzheimer, she spoke Slovenian. Nobody could understand what she was saying because we are the region that is at the border. This is Europe, hybrid, creolized. It's a space for Edouard Glissant, poetics of relation. There's not a space of nativist grandiosity. And I think this, we have to fight the stupidity of this form of nativism. It's not even interesting nationalism. De Gaulle was interesting nationalism. Jean Monnet was interesting nationalism. This is crap. This is real rubbish, ignorant and totally homicidal, violent, aggressive, not caring for others. So I would really go ballistic if I were to teach a course on this, Lana. Call me in and I will do it for you.
Thank you, Rosie. Maybe I will jump in with my question just briefly before we go to Federica's in the chat. I think also all this conversation about polarization, which we're seeing at every level now, really in our society, also brings us back to the point you mentioned earlier, which is on critical citizenship and firstly on critical thinking, so that we can actually practice critical citizenship. But I also have a question in terms of this practice of citizenship, because we are seeing it now, as you mentioned, there's kind of a new, also progressive ways of doing citizenship or understanding citizenship. And we are really seeing it among young people with kind of taking in citizenship, their practice of citizenship and their responsibility for it, and avoiding the structures for it, but rather kind of practicing more non-conventional type of citizenship in demanding certain rights and in demanding basically certain changes to the system. So maybe if you can reflect on these less conventional forms of citizenship and participation, and perhaps also if we have time on citizenship in the times of crisis as we have now.
So when you say,
I will close with my questions now. Sorry, I know I have overtaken it.
The big question. So the non-conventional citizenship, we are back to the idea of practices, and you are back to the question of people who don't have European nationality and are trying to get by. And I think that the idea of global mobility whether it is in the mode of colonialism and the post-colonial subject, or whether it is in the mode of our immigrants. Let's not forget that Europe has sent millions of people into the world, Ireland, Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, millions out there, and many of them wanting to return using, again, the structures of European citizenship. This enormous diversity and variety is something that, again, should be reflected in the curriculum. How come these people are here? The question that Paul Gilroy begins a lot of his work on the Black Atlantic with. Why are these Black people here? And then the people says, because you were there. We are here because you were there. That's the answer. Did you even know that you were there? And we start again the discussion. And I think this is why it's important to ground the discussion and understand global mobility is a very interesting way to say these people are back here because there is a history behind it. And by being accountable for this history without completely causing a bankruptcy of the system, we need to have flexible models of integration in the European space. Absolutely. There are many other reasons for this. Draghi, the Italian prime minister, would say we need them for the workforce, the economic assets. Europe is aging. These young people are young, so there is a youth and demographic. There are multiple levels at which you could defend this. All the more important in terms of crisis. The pandemic has not invented inequalities. The pandemic has shown them up for what they are. It's an indicator of enormous inequalities, socioeconomic, environmental, I would say moral, spiritual inequality in terms of access to basics. It has also shown a couple of other things. Number one, the environment strikes back. The pandemic is born out of an interference of human life with animal life in terms of food production. It couldn't be more vital. So it's human to non-human. As you know, a lot of my work is on posthumanism. Here you have it, and almost emblematic. Human to non-human, big pandemic. We are completely in the hands of technology to show it. So paradoxically, something that begins as an environmental problem, criticizing the technical industrial exploitation of the environment, is resolved by more doses of technology. Look at us today. What do? We use technology to work on because we have it, because we have access. So the technology is at the core of cognitive capitalism, which is the system that exploits nature, becomes the solution of the problem for those that can. Almost emblematic of the paradoxes, and also of how we are caught in these paradoxes and as part of the problems and consequently as part of the solutions. What the pandemic also shows is that we are in this together. And if India goes down or Brazil go down the way they do, we all go down. It's not as if we can immunize ourselves in a bubble and be free. Viruses circulate because they're part of the relational bioeconomy of bodies living together on a planet. It's transcorporeal. It's embodied and embedded. Get real. The idea that you live in a vacuum is scientifically insane. It is not so. We're interconnected. So we can only get out of this together. This calls for a form of solidarity on a planetary scale that we have never seen before. Enormous opportunity to actually grow up into more forms of solidarity and compassion, and immediately taking stock of the problem. We don't even know how many illegal laborers we have in the north of Italy. And the Indian cases, the cases of the Indian variant that were shown, I think in Milan or Bologna, I don't remember where, were from Indian workers that went back to India for their yearly pilgrimage and then came back and they brought the variant. Global mobility, welcome to the third millennium. It comes with responsibilities of solidarity. We can only get out of this together. Any nativist that think I only immunize my family and I'm safe is an idiot and will kill his family as a result. Only together can we solve this. And I think here is a chance for a more European broad model. I agree, cosmopolitan is the wrong term, but planetary transnational model of citizenship to become operational. And we have to really fight for this, to give everybody a chance to get that jab, to get that vaccine.
Thank you, Rosi. One last question here that's from an anonymous person that is here also with us online, that is asking if you would give three pieces of advice for educators or youth workers engaged in education for democratic citizenship. What would be these three pieces of advice?
How fantastic. So the first thing that I would say is position yourself somewhere, ground yourself somewhere. That somewhere can be a discipline, history, philosophy, literature, within a culture, which means a language, a tradition. Take it on and embrace it, but embrace it in its complexity. So ground it, embrace it, complexify it, and ask difficult questions. Ask, if you're looking at history, one of my favorite subjects, ask who is there and who is missing? What am I missing? Look for the missing people. In feminism, we do this all the time, and we started by looking at the history of literature. They were all men. So no woman ever wrote anything in the world. That was back in the 1970s. Huge revolution now. When you read histories of literature and of painting, of art, the women are in. Let's multiply this across all the other variables, LGBT, other nationalities, other cultures, diversity. Who is missing? Look for the missing people. Embrace criticism creatively. Criticism is not negativity. Criticism is not, I hate your guts, I'm going to kill you because you did something wrong. Don't be so primitive. Don't be so simplistic. Criticism is a mode of relation that asks for accountability. There is something wrong. If Italian language departments, Spanish language departments, Portuguese language departments ignore colonialism, there's something wrong. And it's too easy to teach post-colonial studies in English literature. Too easy. It's an alibi, because at least the English have done that work. Why don't we do that within our own national traditions? Instead of the rhetoric of the lament, so that Serbia is forever the poor victim of world conspiracy. Massive empire, massive, huge player. So look at the complexity, embrace criticism creatively, construct hope. Only knowledge can make us free. Only knowledge can give us hope. So embrace the difficult things, forgive, move on, but embrace the complexity. We're a great culture, we're an atrocious culture, and embrace the complexity. It's time to move on and transform this. Education is the tool. The European Union is a project. Fantastic teaching kit, I tell you. Phenomenal support for critical thinking.
Thank you very much, Rosi, and thank you very much also for all the questions, no? Because it's very, great question, because this makes also our discussion very interesting. And to me, you touched on for closing exactly was a great message for us, because of course, what you were saying now, at least for us, is very important. It's also what we try to do, to keep complexity on the agenda and not try to simplify. And this, I think, is something that we needed to remind, but also to practice in the youth field. Not try to give simple, simplistic messages to the young people or also to youth worker that you work with, but to challenge ourselves.
Simon Rushdie has a beautiful sentence. We don't have the right to simplify that which history has made so complex.
Exactly.
We have the right to simplify that which history has made so complex.
We need to find tools. We need to find occasion, events to transform and to translate in a way that this complexity could be understood easily. But I think the message of complexity, and also, as you said, who is missing? I think in the picture that we have nowadays, also during pandemic, young people are sometimes the actors that are pictured. They are students, but not young people per se, as an holistic approach. So who is missing, I think, is a very important, even pedagogical question that we need to ask ourselves when we draw a project, when we prepare, we design our training course. Coming back also to the last question, advice for educators and youth workers, asking ourselves who is missing in the group of young people, and why, and which is our responsibility. And sometimes we need also to gain new tools to reply to this question.
Indeed.
I would say thank you very much. It was very, very inspiring. And I hope, and we hope, as Alana said, that we can organize a panel all together in a forum somewhere in Europe. And this would be the pleasure to host and to have a further discussion in this direction. Alana, do you want to add something for closing?
I was just thinking when we were having all these questions, it would be really amazing to just sit somewhere and have coffee and discuss all these things, not within 1 hour webinar, but really kind of an evening at the youth center in post formal kind of event.
Let's make it a date to come. I would love
it. We really hope so, but it was really inspiring for all of us. And as Fede and Bruno mentioned, we will be using these videos later on, as well as educational materials for the coming forums.
I said the word idiot. I shouldn't. You should have added that one out. Sorry. Well, it's not a dirty word, but it's not very polite.
We will be sharing this, and I'm sure people will be very pleased to learn a lot and also to be inspired and challenged. I think a lot of the things are for us also to challenge ourselves and our understandings of citizenship and education. So we will be continuing with the series. Follow our page, Edu4Europe, for more details on the upcoming webinars and also updates on the forum, either online or live. As the situation evolves, we will adapt. So thank you again.
Best of luck to you all. Thank you for the hospitality. Good work. It's very important. I hope we meet again.
Thank you. Definitely soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.